1% of the population becoming coherent in consciousness and higher states of consciousness can shift the other 99%. She was doing it with a bunch of friends on her birthday, and they had a big UFO come over and had this amazing contact experience. The level of corruption that exists within media and government is almost unbelievable. This is an unacknowledged crisis, and what we're trying to do is to let the public know this is a crisis and what we can do about it. As you know, this subject has been blacklisted by most of the media, unless the leaks and the information coming out are portraying the extraterrestrial presence as an existential threat. If it's portrayed as a threat, what happens is that they then will allow it to be on the news. And it's very rare exceptions to that. So if you see, like a couple years ago, they released this footage of our Navy jets chasing these UFOs off the coast of California. And that came out of a Pentagon deliberate leak, let's call it. The people behind that control the strings of major media, and they got on there and said, you know, this is a threat to our national security, blah, 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 the usual warmongering nonsense. And we, you know, that's the agenda. So I always tell people, if it breaks into the mainstream media, it's almost always been cleared by the intelligence community, and it has a spin on it that's complete BS. It's just completely false. So I think it's very important that people realize that this is why, like, I was very happy that Demi Lovato, I didn't know her personally, but she saw Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, which, by the way, is now on Amazon Prime, and so is Unacknowledged. These two documentaries have both just been released on Amazon Prime globally. And she was so excited to see it. And she actually, on her birthday in July, when she turned 28, we have an app called the CE5 Contact app that trains people in the techniques of meditation, consciousness, contact, a whole lot of really advanced concepts. And she was doing it with a bunch of friends on her birthday, and they had a big UFO come over and had this amazing contact experience.
Wow.
So then last month we went up to Joshua Tree with Demi Lovato and Mod Sun and a lot of their friends, and did a whole, week, several days out under the skies. And if you get on our site, you'll see this amazing ship that came right above us, cobalt blue, and then this other object that floated over for 6 minutes that was silent. And she just loves it, because I told her, I said, I need people like you guys to help us get the word out, because the mainstream media and even the big tech companies often shadow ban all of our content. So it's really important to help with that, because what I've told people, if you look at Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, part of the concept is in there that there's a 1% of the population becoming coherent in consciousness and higher states of consciousness can shift the other 99%. And people say, what does that have to do with UFOs? It has everything to do with it, because these interstellar civilizations are using technologies that are consciousness-based for their communication systems. That's the whole thing, that it only one person can affect something at a remote distance with consciousness and thought, but a group of people doing it coherently, let's say, has orders of magnitude larger effect. So that's why we're doing, like with the premiere on Friday night, we're going to do a global CE5 meditation that will be live. And we're trying to do those on a regular basis. We did one from Joshua Tree last month. But getting the word out is really important when you're sort of the big underdog taking on these corrupt interests, and they are corrupt. I mean, I'm here in Washington right now, and the level of corruption that exists within media and government is almost unbelievable. To the ordinary citizen, it's mind-boggling. Well, I think the intelligence community is very good at using any opportunity to distort things and create an agenda that advances what they want. So the intelligence community has kept, for example, the UFO secret for 70 years or more. I'll give you a little sneak preview of something that's going to come out eventually. I just received a 1920s photograph authentic, from someone whose grandmother had been at the atomic bomb test site, of the dissection of an extraterrestrial being on an autopsy table. This is in the briefing materials going to President-elect Biden and has gone to Trump and others. But the point I'm making is that this has been a secret for a very long time, better part of a century, actually. And the reason they're keeping it secret is that the power of knowing that we're not alone in the universe, but more importantly, the knowledge technologically of how those objects are moving. Like you look at that footage that was all over CNN, New York Times, that's not using a rocket. I mean, forget Elon Musk's Spacex, it just went up yesterday or whatever. You're talking about such advanced physics, both in the science of consciousness for communication, but also energy and propulsion, that when that comes out, it's going to be the end of oil and gas and coal and nuclear power and public utilities and surface roads. And, you're talking about something that would be much bigger in that one disclosure would be bigger than everything that's happened from the Industrial Revolution to now. So there are a lot of powerful vested interests that don't want things to change, even if we destroy the biosphere, maintaining the status quo. So there are a few of us who are advocating for a change and moving forward, but there's, the center of power certainly is against what we're doing, which understands why we have so many problems getting this information out. One of the things that everyone needs to see is this documentary, Unacknowledged. Mm-hmm. It sort of analyzes, how do you maintain a secret this big? How does that operate? And, I started out with maybe a dozen top secret whistleblowers, and now I have over 980 that disclosed information to me from inside covert operations. Some are corporate, aerospace, many are military, some are intel, CIA, DIA, naval intelligence. And so what I tell people is that this information has vast implications for the future sustainable planet we need to have, but it also has big ramifications for stakeholders in those industries I just mentioned, which in their aggregate is in excess of $1,000 trillion in assets and market caps and what have you. So one of the problems is that we've stayed too long in a paradigm that should have gone the way of the dinosaurs in the 50s. Yeah. And it's interesting, if you look at one of the documents we have in these documentaries is a letter from Ben Rich, who is the head of the Lockheed Skunk Works. And it was a letter between him and a friend that we acquired from his friend's widow. And it was correspondence in 1986. And we're talking, 34 years ago. And between Ben Rich and his friend, and the friend was saying, look, are these UFOs ours or are they extraterrestrial? And Ben Rich, in his handwriting, signed on the stationery for Lockheed Skunk Works, says it's both. They're both ours and extraterrestrial. So we always tell people, I mentioned this when I was on one of these TV shows not long ago, and I said, this is not my opinion. We have so much evidence on this, it's unbelievable. This black book right here is going President-elect Biden that has an enormous amount of information. I mean, a copy's already gone, and to Vladimir Putin and to the Trump administration. And so what we're trying to do is put together a coalition to disclose this information, and with it, the sciences and technologies that would completely change the way our civilization operates and would make it sustainable into the future thousands and thousands of years. The caveat is these technologies have to be used peacefully. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, the people who have the technologies that have been developed are not using them peacefully already, although they're very clandestine operations. For example, we have been tracking and targeting extraterrestrial vehicles for decades and hitting them, which is on Sunday, the November 22nd, you're going to see a top secret witness come forward that's going to go wide over our channels, who is a retrieval specialist on a vessel, Coast Guard vessel off the coast of Guam. And this was recent. This is 2002. And he was called in on a mutual assist from operations to retrieve an ET vehicle that had been disabled, that was caught in the net of a fishing vessel from Taiwan. And he comes forward, full name, rank, serial number, and all the particulars of how this happened. So now he didn't know the backstory of how these things actually get disabled. And I always point out, you don't travel from another star system or another galaxy and just somehow can't navigate around the Earth. There are very high-powered electronic weapons that have been placed on satellites, that are on aircraft, that are on the ground in the oceans, that track and target these objects. And one of my big projects has been to try to get a stand-down order on that. Okay, so because the risks are enormous. And I always tell people, one of the greatest proofs that these civilizations are not hostile is that they have not struck back. If they were hostile, given what we've been doing since at least the 40s. And by the way, Roswell that everyone hears about, that was not an accident. They didn't go through a thunderstorm and couldn't navigate an electrical storm, but you could intergalactic distances. That was actually a targeted hit. And I have a document that's up on our website that's actually become the most viewed document now on the FBI's website, because we forced it out. That is a field officer in Roswell from 1947 reporting back to J. Edgar Hoover here in DC that they had set up a new, quote, radar. And radar, I put in quotes, that's a euphemism for a weapon system often, that's piggybacked on radar, that's electronic weapon systems. And they had a new radar system that apparently caused these 3 craft. There were 3 that actually went down. 2 were found right away. 1 was found 3 or 4 years later in a remote area of northwestern New Mexico. But what's interesting about that is that those were the early days of experimenting with electromagnetic weapons. And those have now gone through dozens of generations of refinement, unfortunately. So this is an unacknowledged crisis. And what we're trying to do is to let the public know this is a crisis and what we can do about it. So what we can do about it is disclosure, which is what the Disclosure Project that I founded is. And the other thing we can do about it is the movie Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, which you guys have seen, that is really about sort of a mass diplomatic effort where we ask the public to learn a set of techniques to make contact with these civilizations. And this is astonishing for people to entertain the idea, but they actually do respond if you do it in the right ethical purpose, the right intent, as it were. And that's what's in this movie. I mean, I'm sure you guys have seen, the footage of and photographs of the ET beings, and they come in and out of other dimensions from other star systems. It's mind-blowing stuff, and it's all real. And I tell people that this is something that, I've been doing since I was 18, when I had a contact experience, long before I was an emergency doctor. And that now I'm trying to train people to do this so that we just bypass the government. It's like, why do we need, the head of Army intelligence threatened my life back in 1992. And he says, who the hell do you think you are? And I said, look, I'm a free citizen of the earth and of the cosmos. And I don't need your permission. You can go pound salt. Actually, I think that's what astonished Demi Lovato, because she got the app, which is a brand new app that actually helps you network with other people in your area and hook up and go out and do this. And it's a whole training program in this app. And the CE5 Contact app. And she just did it with some friends on her birthday and had this amazing event happen that they all saw. And she realized that, if you do this, innocently, and you're not doing it to have a militarized approach, these civilizations, that's what they're waiting for. People say, what are they waiting for? I said, they're waiting for us to quit acting like morons and do something peaceful and constructive. And they've been waiting a long time. And that's why it needs to be a mass public movement, because it's not that I don't still try to provide information to government leaders, but frankly, as you know, I've been briefing people like the Clinton administration and the CIA director, or the first CIA director for Bill Clinton since 92 and 93. And it's the way governments work is that there's so much pressure not to do something that upsets the status quo, particularly the big funders and stakeholders in the political process. And this is left, right, center, Republican, Democratic, this country, Canada, UK. It really doesn't matter. Everyone gets, into this sort of partisan mindset. But I said, the group that's running these projects, they don't care, or I hate to say this, a rat's ass about all the things that everyone's fighting about. They want everyone to be diverted fighting, so they're looking in the wrong direction, so they can get away with their dirty little activities on the side, and nobody's watching. Nobody's watching, and the media isn't reporting it. And the only time the media ever reports this issue is when the intelligence community says, cover this, and it'll always have this spin, which is, they're very good at, the spinmeisters in Washington. They're very good at spinning it as a incursion into our airspace or a threat to our national security. Yeah, I'm sure you've seen Marco Rubio, the Senate Intelligence Committee chairman, on CNN and other networks saying, yes, we need to investigate this. It's a threat to our national security. Now, why did that happen? And why has President Trump made comments like that? It's because they have been briefed by people who I know, who go up there and tell them all these lies. And, all the way back to Ronald Reagan, when he started the whole SDI, Star Wars, putting things in space to, shoot things. That was, you guys may not recall that, but back in the 80s. And I met with Colonel Holman, who was on the Air Force committee that was trying to persuade first Jimmy Carter and then Ronald Reagan to develop these weapons. And the reason that was done in classified briefings was, we have to fight the alien threat. And of course, Jimmy Carter, who was a nuclear engineer, by the way, was way too smart to fall for that. But unfortunately, Reagan took it hook, line, and sinker, which is why at the UN, he said, wouldn't our job of creating world unity be easier if we had a common alien threat to unite against? I'm going, oh, great. The only way the world can be peaceful and united is that we're on another planet. I mean, this is like, taking 20 steps backwards, right? So one of the big problems is that when the public needs to understand, when you become president of the United States or chairman of the Senate Intelligence Community, and you make an inquiry into this, they will either tell you nothing, or they will tell you one lie after another lie after another lie, which is one of the reasons why I keep a place here in DC to try to correct that. But it's my disclosure project group against the entire covert establishment trying to convince them. So it's obviously, Lawrence Rockefeller called it he said, don't waste your life trying to do this. But, my own view of it is that, you got to do it. The stakes are too high. And, you come in as a person like most politicians out of business or law or governors or what have you, you don't know how these guys are operating. I mean, they're going to run circles around you. So we need some checks and balances. And the fourth estate, the media, is supposed to do that. But they're so corrupt. If you look at this documentary, this famous civil rights and constitutional attorney, Daniel Sheehan, he says, yeah, back in the Pentagon paper days in the 70s, I saw a document that listed 42 people on the major media all over the world that were on the payroll of the CIA. These were senior national security editors and stuff like that. So I tell people, look at this, I've tried to, I was telling before we went live to John that, both these documentaries, which are almost 4 hours of content, is like the very smallest tip of an iceberg of what's in my archives. But when you hear something like that from someone of Daniel Sheehan's stature, you realize that what the public are allowed to hear and see and know on any media, it doesn't matter if it's left, right, center, forget that.
Yep.
It has to go through a process. And this idea that people are getting information accurately from the news media is just not true on this subject, not on every subject, but on this subject. So I think that's why it's incumbent on the citizens to disclose this information to each other the best way we can. And then secondly, to create our own contact teams with these civilizations. And, you know, if the United Nations and our State Department and other countries aren't going to do it peacefully, why can't we? And that's been sort of the whole foundation of the project that I founded back. This is actually the 30-year anniversary of founding